Hello and welcome to the 5 Minute Call, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the stories of the people that make theatre happen.
In this episode, we're talking to Katy Bryant.
Katy has had an impressive career working on more than 30 shows and opening some of the biggest productions on the West End as company manager, including Hamilton, Mary Poppins and Les Mis staged concert.
We explore Katy's journey into the industry and how she's committed to creating a positive environment for those who work in theatre.
Members of the company, this is your 5-minute call. All beginners, please make your way to the stage. This is your 5-minute call. Your 5-minute call.
Good morning, Katy.
Good morning. How are you?
Thank you for joining us on the 5-minute call podcast.
Pleasure.
We're proper delighted to have you here.
I have been swimming this morning, so I'm fairly alert. But having just had a bit of a break, it's I needed to get my brain thinking at this time of morning. So even though it's not that early.
I love an early morning swim.
Yeah, it's good. It's really
Very
good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Normally when I'm working, it's that thing of like trying to carve out some time in the day for you. And so you've done something for yourself before the day started and anyone takes your time. Because other people are like, oh yeah, I go for a run at night and all of that. That's never going to happen for me. So it needs to be the first thing I do. Otherwise
Otherwise, it's just
the day's gone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have a lot of things like that, though. If they haven't happened by 9 o'clock, they're not going to happen.
Yeah, I just think it's good, especially with, everyone being busy. I think it's just, if you can just find that minute for you or that half an hour for you, everyone else is going to get a better version of you as the day goes on. Or a worse version if you don't get that time. Yeah, so
I need to be stricter and do it more.
it's really good. And then once you get into it, they say, don't they, that like once you've done something for 3 weeks, it becomes habit.
Yes.
Yes.
So you just got to do it for 3
Yeah,
weeks.
that's where I felt because
Yeah,
I try
I
and
think it
go to
needs
the
longer,
gym.
but yeah.
I try and get to the gym for like 7:30, and then some days I'm just so busy and I don't go. But I never hit that consistent 3-week mark.
Yeah.
So I don't build that habit.
Try it.
Yeah,
It's that
gotta
thing,
get
isn't
on
it? I think is it Joe Wicks that says you never regret it's like the idea of going to the gym or the idea of going to do any exercise is like worse than the actual doing
actually
it.
having done it.
And then you'll never regret it. And you're like, yeah, that's not true. And then you think, well, actually, it could be. It is true. So, yeah. But I'm definitely not here to talk about fitness. That's definitely not.
What we should do.
That's definitely not my
where you
forte.
get people to come in and talk about things they know nothing about and aren't.
I can talk about the benefits of
great.
it
There
for
you
other
go.
people and the good things about doing it for yourself. But I think as a general topic of conversation, people would be surprised to hear me talk about that.
Maybe not. Okay. Okay then. All right, let's go to somewhere that you're very comfortable. Can you tell us how you got to be who you are today, what you're doing today, your path into theatre?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it on the way in this morning, and I think I started out like most kids. So I always enjoyed doing drama at school. I was Mary in the Nativity play when I was about 5. So in reception, tripped over my veil, which is also very typical of me. I'm very clumsy. And so my parents had this great picture of me with like a wonky headdress. And I played the violin and had violin lessons at school when those things were still free, and sort of did all of the choirs and all of those sorts of things and didn't really think anything of it. Went on the school trips to the theatre. As a family, we went to panto trips at Christmas, and my grandparents lived in Stratford, so occasionally would go and see stuff there. And then as I got a little bit older, me and my mum would sometimes have a trip to Birmingham or to London to see something while my dad and brother and sister went off climbing. And again, would see all sorts of things like plays and musicals, and I think Riverdance once and Les Mis once. So, and then the school trips. I lived in Worcestershire, so we had primary school, middle school, high school. So when once I finished GCSEs, I went to Worcester sixth form. And I had, up until that point, I'd been really interested in working with children.
That's a very meaningful pause.
Up until that point.
Having done, I did some work experience in a nursery when I was about 14 or 15. I spent the week making binoculars out of toilet rolls. And I thought, this is not for me. I can't do this. But again, it kind of ties into like prop making things years down the line. And then rather ungratefully, one of my high school teachers got me a placement at Pebble Mill. So I was showing my age now. because I wanted to go to a theatre, but you had to be 16. But he was like, well, my friend works in wardrobe at Pebble Mill, so you can go there for the week. So me and my friend Katy had a great week doing all of that.
So you were already interested in theatre by that point?
I didn't really think it was a career, but it was something I was interested in.
Okay.
And it was only when I went to sixth form college and I did A-level theatre studies that my drama teacher, Greg, said, well, you could do this for a career. And I was like, what do you mean? And that was a complete mystery to me. I didn't come from a family of performers or anything like that. And so sort of turned and sort of started doing stage management. And I look back and actually I'd been doing a version of that in middle school on productions and things and just not realised that's what it was called. But you either were performing or you were doing the backstage stuff. And so I started applying to drama schools, never thinking that I would really get in. I think my parents were probably slightly nervous about me going to drama school. They had heard horror stories. And ideally, I wanted to go to Central because I really like the stairs. And I really like the view from the second floor. And it was in a really nice place. And I was like, oh, yeah. And it was a 2-year course. You had to talk about a defining moment that had made you think about going into theatre. And so and it's such a random thing, but I'd been to see a production of Aspects of Love in Stratford with my mum. And I must have been about 14, so it was a bit of a random thing for a 14-year-old at that point to go and see. But I remember they had a revolving stage. And I remember how much they used it. And that kind of got me interested in sort of thinking about how they were using it and perhaps overusing it and all the different things that were coming on and off it and how the actors were using it. And somehow that sort of might have swung it or helped, or I don't know, but I could talk about it. But yeah, I went to various drama schools to do the induction days or the interview days, and they generally were like full days of things. And Central just felt like the right fit, apart from the aesthetics of it. Yeah. It felt like the right place for me. So it was a 2-year diploma course in technical theatre, I think, and specialising in stage management. And then just before I started there, they sent a letter saying, it's now a 3-year degree course, which my parents were thrilled about.
Right.
And I was like, but I don't need a degree because it's never going to help me.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think it's ever helped me. I mean, Mum has a certificate on her wall and the photo and all of that. So I suppose it's good for that. But other than that, I'm not sure it's ever, but who knows? Maybe it has been and I've just not been aware of it. So I went to drama school for 3 years and spent the first year thinking, which we now call imposter syndrome, but spent the whole of the first year thinking I was going to get thrown out because everyone else was like, oh yeah, I've done this and I've done that. And I was like, I haven't done anything. But yeah, did that for 3 years.
But I think anybody sitting in front of me saying, when I was 14, I went to see something and I was fascinated by the revolving stage and how the performers were using it, I think I might go, I think you've got the eye. I think you've got the interest. That's
the interest. I don't know what it was. And I suppose, it was the eye. And then I suppose you look back and that my dad was a carpenter in his in his own time. And, Mum had always enjoyed, costume and things like that. So there was an interest there. But I think the whole concept that this could be a career. So I went to drama school, had a great time. I knew that going to drama school by itself just wasn't going to be the name of going to Central or wherever wasn't going to be enough. So I used to do projects in the holidays and go and do things like pub theatre, which probably doesn't exist really so much anymore, where you are literally doing everything and keeping one foot on the floor when you're operating anything because, there's a slight chance you might get a slight electric shock. I won't say where that was, but you're doing everything. And it was brilliant. And it was a really good way of learning because you are just doing everything and but I think people are less inclined to do that now because people want to go in, you want to leave drama school and go straight to the top and not interested in doing the...
But also, is it not just much harder to get in because of those health and safety issues, because of new rules about...
Yeah, I think it's all changed so much. Yeah. And then as part of my 3rd year project, we had to go on placements and things. And so I just started meeting lots of different people in the West End because that's what I thought I wanted to do. I wanted to go into stage management. So I started for part of my dissertation, which was on whether producing is a natural progression from stage management. It's quite an interesting title. So I met lots of different people and some of them are really good friends now. You just come back to them years later and things. And someone said to me, the best thing you can do is get yourself as a job as a runner on a new production, because that's where you'll learn. So I was like, right, I'm going to do that. So he bought the stage and then saw that Lion King were advertising for runners for when Lion King was opening back in 99.
Wow.
So that was going into my third year at college. And brilliantly, I mean, I harassed the poor stage manager, Greg, who is a really good friend these days. But I think at the time I probably drove him slightly crazy because I did this thing. I thought I was being really clever. And again, it's all changed over time because people don't tend to send letters anymore. But I wrote a letter on purple paper for a start, because I was like, that will stand out. Mm-hmm. Will also make it really hard to read.
Yeah.
And then followed up with a phone call like once a week to be like, oh, I just wanted to check you got my letter, and if you want to, is there any chance I can come and meet you, or any of those things. And I suppose it's good on one hand, but I think maybe finding the balance would probably be my advice to anyone else doing it these days. But it worked out, and I got the placement, and I ended up staying there for like 6 months, and I think that really set me up for where I am now, or certainly where I ended up for a big chunk of my career so far, because I started off doing the stage management part of it, and then went into the company office and worked with the company manager. And that really got me onto thinking that company management was something that I really wanted to get into at some point. At that point, I was 20, and I was like, oh yeah, well maybe in a couple of years I can be a company manager. No, that's like, it's going to take a bit longer than that.
Yeah.
And you need a bit of life experience and all of that.
Yeah. What was it, do you think, that appealed to you about the company management at that point?
I think it was the people. I think it's you're involved with so many different types of people for a start, especially when a show is being sort of set up. You've got all of your creative team, you've got your cast, you've got your technical departments, you've got the Americans, the American office. There's so many people. And I think also the organising, the logistics, the planning, the scheduling, the fact that every day was different. I think that was good. And I always knew that I probably wasn't going to end up having a career solely in stage management, because whilst I liked being an ASM, assistant stage manager, I didn't want to be a DSM. There's lots of people that go, I want to be a DSM, deputy stage manager, and I want to open a show as a DSM. I want to open that big musical or that play or the Olympics or that event and be that person. And that didn't appeal to me. And I also didn't want to be a stage manager particularly, because I didn't have enough interest in where you were going to store that piece of set in the wing, and how we're going to get that chair from there to there, and where we're going to do this scene change. Like, that's not where my interest lay. Yeah. Not to say that I didn't get on with it and, knew that it was like an important, and that's just where some people's brains go. It's there's a production manager that says, he enjoys being a production manager because he deals with things that don't answer back. Yeah. Because it's dealing with furniture, it's dealing with all of that, and building sets and things. So I left drama school, and I was really lucky, and that from doing that placement on Lion King, I met a production manager, Stuart Crosby and Simon Marlowe, who were looking to staff up a production of Napoleon, which was going to the Shaftesbury Theatre. And at that point, the Shaftesbury had a bit of a, if you were doing a job at the Shaftesbury, you knew that it probably wasn't going to last that long, right. Which, starting out, was the best thing you could do, because it meant you got a show on your CV, you got your foot in the door, you got to work with a whole new team of people, and got that experience, and then you could go and do something else. And that's also when you're young and you don't have that fear of like, I've got to pay bills and mortgages and, children and all of that stuff. So you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And I was really lucky, and they took me on because, I had was just about to leave drama school, and that was really good. And the team were brilliant, and a lot of them had worked together before. Do
you think that was that a normal thing to happen at that point, taking somebody who was that fresh?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's luck, but I think it is a certain amount of being in the right place at the right time and having met the right people. And I think it's also sort of understanding your place. And actually, I was talking to a friend about this last night, because it's knowing your place. Because sometimes if you're working with a group of people that all know each other, there is that degree of familiarity and what appears to be a laid back attitude. And if you're not aware that that's what it is, as the new person, you can sometimes get it wrong. You misjudge the situation and can come across as being a bit sort of over familiar, not really appreciating your place in the team or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think it was that I was super respectful of the fact that I was working with these people who had been doing it for a lot longer than me, and that I just needed to like not be quiet but learn from the people around me, rather than being like, oh yeah, when I did it on a school production we did it this way. It's like they don't care about that, they don't want to know that.
No.
Equally they would, if you're in the right place and you're with the right group of people, it can be brilliant, because they'll also go, well, what do you think about that? Then that's fine. But occasionally, like, I think certainly then for me, I was like, just learn whatever you can. I was really keen, but hopefully not annoyingly keen. There's a fine line, isn't there?
Yes.
And do the things and just be keen and do all those basic things they teach you, which is like, be on time, be early, be polite, know who people are, and don't say no when someone asks you to do something. And I think those things are probably make a good cup of tea, and I think that's something that's still relevant today. It doesn't matter how high up the ladder you go, how successful you become. I think if you can still be that person that will make the tea, it's a great thing.
Make a good cuppa.
I say that to people, and sometimes they're like, oh, really? Because I think sometimes, and I don't know, I think now people are sort of taught, or certainly there was a period of time where people were like, no, we don't. We're told at drama school now not to do that. And I was like, well, that's a shame, because actually it's a really good thing to be able to do, because it's not the actual thing of making the tea, but it's actually what it represents, and actually recognizing that actually somebody is having a problem, or they need a break, or or also it gets you into some really good conversations, and people appreciate it, and that applies. And I think sometimes people think, oh, if I make the tea, that people won't think I'm in this position or that position. It's like, it doesn't matter.
It's a really good point, actually, because I think a lot of people feel like it's somewhat beneath them.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just, I don't want to make it. But actually, you're right. It's a really good tool, I suppose, to use to get yourself in the places that you want to be.
Yeah, and it's just a decent thing to do in a world where that's like, it's also an easy win.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need to do those things. It's like, as I've gone on through my career, and obviously because it started in stage management. And so I did Napoleon, that only lasted for about 6 months. And then I went onto Mamma Mia, which I'd done a bit of depping on while I was still at college. So depping at that time was a newish thing, where people were suddenly realising that actually people didn't want to work 8 shows a week. And by being able to have a dep to cover holidays and things and sickness just meant that it made life a bit better for people. Now it's sort of pretty much common practice that any show will have either be covered well enough that people can have a night off, or they'll bring in deps. And again, being a dep is a really great way of getting into the industry, because you can, if you're good, you can dep on a few shows at the same time, and meet lots of people and get the experience.
Not super challenging though, just dropping into a show.
Again, I did it when I was young, so I didn't really think about it. I just was like, oh yeah, I can come and do that tonight. Oh yeah, I'm at college, but I'll come in afterwards.
And just talk to us, for anybody who doesn't know, about the mechanics of that. How does somebody just walk into the theatre and know how to dep the show?
So you'd learn it. So you'd get a phone call, you'd go in and meet. I went in and met the stage manager. And they show you around, they talk about it, and then they'll bring you in and get you to learn what is called a plot. So you're either learning the stage right plots, that's the things that happen on that side of the stage left, stage right, or whatever. There might be 3 or 4 plots, and they'll generally teach you one to start with, and they'll just see how you go with that. And either you'll pick it up. So it usually involves, probably it's all on iPads or something now, but generally it means having a few sheets of paper. And you literally read what your cue is, and you know when you have to do it. So at this point in the show, you move this, or you do this, or you set this, or you do that. And if you can pick it up and you can do it, then great. And you get on with people and you're reliable. It can be really good. And sometimes people just can't get it for whatever reason, because some shows are really tricky, and you just can't get it in your head. And it sometimes would be that you would learn, and then if you've been there for a little while, they might be like, oh, well, we'll teach you this one, and then they'll mix it up. Or they might go, actually, we're just going to keep you on this one. But then the more you know, the better it is for the team, because that gives them more flexibility within the department. So, and then you generally will have that bit of paper, and you'll fold it up, and then you'll end up in your pocket, and you might keep it as a bit of a safety blanket for like quite a long time afterwards. And then there might be a period of time where you don't go in at all. So that first show back, you're always a bit like, oh God, I hope I remember it. But generally it's a bit like muscle memory. You can And there's enough people around you that can go, don't forget you're doing that. Well, you need to be up there now. So
I still think that takes some nerve.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
you just do it. I suppose if it's what your brain, and you've done it on you've done it on your own shows or in in previous places where you've created that track or that set of cues. So then I think it's about that's what you can do. I'm not sure I could do it now, but then so I did that, and part of that I also got to learn to call the show, which was great. Again, I look at some of the shows I've called over the years, and I go, I don't think I could do that now. Well, how did I do that at the time? I don't remember how I did it. And so after I did Mamma Mia, and at that point I was like, I'll do my contract, because I still think, if you agree to do a show, you normally get signed up. If you're taking over on a show, then it's normally a 12-month contract. If it's a show from scratch, then it's usually 18 months or a bit longer. But I knew straight away that, like, if I was going to do a show for a year and that's what I'd agreed to do, that's what you're doing. And you've got to do that before you can move on. And I remember phoning my dad and saying, I've done my year on Mamma Mia now, so I'm going to, I've handed my notice in. And he was like, why have you done that? He's like, that's a good job. You could stay there for a while, because he'd worked for the NHS for a long time. And so the idea of like swapping jobs every so often, it was not something he was completely like up to speed with. And I was like, no, it'll be fine. There'll be something else. And I went on to Bombay Dreams, which was this new musical that Andrew Webber was doing at the time. And again, did my contract on that, moved on. And just because I wanted to get the experience, and you can do your contract and move on without annoying people. But if you start a contract and then leave, if you get a reputation for someone that doesn't really commit, that's going to be a problem. But and I think after that, I ended up going to work in production for a little bit.
So how did that happen? Because that's quite a big shift.
By that point, I was thinking that maybe I was still a bit, having now realised that maybe you couldn't be a company manager at 22 and that maybe you needed to do some other things first. And I was still enjoying stage management a lot. I think it was just that I'd gone on to do a one-man show called After Doing Bombay Dreams. And that's the thing, I was always up for doing something completely different. So going from Bombay Dreams to then I think it was a show called George Gershwin Alone. And it was this American guy. And he had this whole show which was purely about Gershwin. And so I did that as DSM, and there was me and an ASM who was really there to cover everything. We did it between us, and there was a production manager. And again, it was just really good experience. But I think from doing that, you then got talking to somebody. They were looking for someone to go in and be a production assistant for a bit. So I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. So again, sort of the naivety of sort of just going, oh yeah, I can do that. And going in. So I went to work with Cold Kitchen. I think a friend of mine had been there and she was leaving, so I sort of slotted in after that for 6 months.
And how did you find it?
I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. And at the same time, I still depped on shows. So you're sort of keeping your hand at that point where you're still trying to work out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And Guy, who I worked for at the time, was really up for that. And he, it helped out because it was also, I depped on one of his shows. So it was Beautiful and Damned, the lyric, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So, that's going back a few years now. And then I can't remember what I did next.
You want me to show you CV?
And then I did go back into stage management for a little while, properly, and did I finished off, they needed someone to take over on Tonight's the Night. And I was like, oh yeah, fine, no problem. So I did that for a bit, and then did Acorn Antiques. And again, Greg, who was the stage manager of that, had been the stage manager that I'd annoyed all those years ago on Lion King.
Is that how you introduced yourself?
No, we'd stayed in touch because he was on Tonight's Tonight as well. And so I did Acorn Antiques, which was great. Like one those shows don't come along that often, and so it was it's an ASM job, and I was like, yeah, great. It was just for 16 weeks. I was like, this is going to be the last one I do, I think. So that was going to be the last one you do before I'm going to move on to being a production assistant somewhere else. That's what was in my head. Yeah. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. This is going to be my last one. And so, I did Acorn Antiques and had a great time on it, with all those brilliant cast people and, Victoria Wood, who was an absolute legend. And just watching someone like her work, how was that? amazing, because she was constantly rewriting things and constantly trying to balance it so that everybody got a song, everybody got a joke, everybody got this, and she was trying to be so fair about it, but ultimately it was her, she'd written it, so it was down to her. And she used to do a couple of shows a week, or one show a week as well, when Julie Walters wasn't on. But it was just a really great bunch of people. And again, all of these jobs that I was doing, I was always sort of watching what the company manager was doing. So you always like, oh yeah, well, I'd do that, or I wouldn't do that, or oh, that's interesting that's happened. Oh, well, that's part of the job as well. So sort of always sort of looking at what else was going on.
Could you tell us, I just press pause for a second. Could you tell us, because we had Lorna Cobbold in before, who talked a lot about the roles, ASM, DSM, stage manager, company manager. What we haven't introduced yet is the idea of production at all, and that side of the business and what that side does. Could you tell us a bit about that? Yeah, of course.
So then working on the production side of things, so you have obviously my background was in theatre, so in the theatre building itself. But then attached to any show you see also has an office attached to it, or a management attached to it. So, for the last few years, I have worked predominantly for Karen McIntosh, for his office. And, that is a whole office of people who do everything from the marketing to the ticketing to the legal side of things, the financial side of things. You have a whole production department, a whole technical department, and within those departments, you will have somebody. You'll have your executive producer, and then underneath that, you will have probably your associate producers or general managers. You'll have a production coordinator. You'll have a production assistant, and those are all just varying levels of responsibility within that world. The production assistant role is a more general role, which is great to get experienced, sort of, because that's more hands-on. You might be doing all sorts of things. You might be helping prep someone's apartment. You're putting together contact sheets. It's all really good stuff, and it's a really, really good way of learning. But again, I think sometimes people want to sort of jump that and move on to the next step. And so as you move up, then you might be doing more to do with the contracting of people, organising rehearsal rooms, dealing with agents, dealing with all sorts of things like that. And then obviously someone like an executive producer who has more of an eye over everything that's going on. And then you've got, like, in Cameron's, there's a technical department. So you've got your technical director, you've got your production managers, you've got a senior production managers, you've got a technical assistant, then you've got a technical production assistant. So again, it's sort of, it's not entry level, but it's the sort of most junior position within the department.
You typically have people worked in theatre before moving to that?
Not necessarily. I think it's a massive asset if you have. And I do think, going back to drama school days when I did my dissertation on whether, producing was a natural progression from stage management.
About this.
I think any job you do in theatre is only going to help if you do want to go on and do something in an office, or be a producer, or be a production manager, because you understand how it all goes together. You understand what people need, and you understand how, you understand situations. You appreciate that people are working long hours, that they're doing 6 days a week. That you also understand that when someone phones up and says, "Oh, we've got a problem with this," you've got a bit of an idea what it is, as opposed to being completely like, "I don't know what that is," or trying to sort of blag your way out of it, or the worst thing, which is dismiss the severity of what the situation is because you don't understand it. Yeah. Sometimes people go into it straight from drama schools. Sometimes people go into it from different routes. So they might have gone into they might have been an intern somewhere. They might have, or they might have always worked their way up in production offices. So you can do it that way and not having worked in the theatre. But I just think I would always recommend that people do it first. Be a dresser, work on the crew. And lots of people do that, and a lot of sometimes, people that have those jobs are also doing other things at the same time. The number of dressers that you meet that are actually, they want to be designers in their own right, or they're working somewhere else as well. And, it's just, people are always quite often doing more than one thing, especially, I suppose, with sort of cost of living and all of those things these days. People aren't just, and I think that's just the nature of theatre people as well. People are very rarely just going, I'll just do this one thing and that's enough. you know. And for those people that are doing that, that's absolutely fine, because it's also time consuming, you know. And it takes, even if you're only doing shows in the evening, your whole day is sort of geared around getting to the show that night, whether you're a performer working backstage. You know, it's not just going, oh, you've got the whole day free, because if you're a performer, you're gearing up to whether you've got a voice for that performance, whether, you know, you're physically able to do the show that night. You know, as a company manager, and probably Lorna talked about that, but, you know, your phone could start ringing at 9 a.m. and it might not finish ringing till sort of midnight sometimes. And again, I think people are getting better, and I think, you know, boundaries is a big thing these days. And I think, but as a company manager, that's very tricky, because sometimes you are the person that people will phone in a crisis. And with hindsight, you might go, that's interesting that they phone me and not their partner or a parent or somebody else. But you take on that sort of responsibility within a production. And so you do get the most random conversations, which you would never get in any other line of work. On All Friends, we had a whole conversation one day about electricity bills and like helping somebody understand how they need, you know, maybe they should do this and maybe they should do that. And I suddenly felt really old as well, because I was like, oh, you know, how did I become this person?
This episode is sponsored by Vocality, a specially formulated blend of tea for professional voice users. Each ingredient has been carefully selected to help you soothe and take care of your voice. The tea is naturally caffeine-free, suitable for vegans, and does not contain any artificial flavours or colours. Vocality is the secret to vocal clarity in a cup. So just go back a second then.
Yeah.
Where did your first company manager position come in? And how did that feel when you got to it?
So when I'd finished doing stage management, I then, or stepped away from stage management, I suppose. I went and did production for quite a few years, and I was really useful for a couple of years. And from there, it was a really great time to be there, because they were doing a lot of new things. So, you know, there was Woman in White at the time, and that had lots of people coming and going and cast changes and things. And then we did Evita and Sound of Music and Joseph. So it was a really great 2 years to be there. And during my time there, I met Michael Grandage, who was directing Evita at the time, but also was running the Donmar warehouse. And at the time, Rug was somewhere you couldn't really progress. You couldn't move up the ladder. You had to move away to go back. And I was also thinking, again, it got to that point and I was like, not sure what's next. And someone suggested company management, and I was like, yeah, I am interested. I had a conversation with Michael, and they were looking for somebody for Parade, the Jason Moore Brown musical at the Donmar, and he said, would you be interested? Yes, I'd love that. And then something happened. I can't remember what happened. I think somebody in-house left the Donmar. So I ended up not doing that job, but then going in and being production administrator there for, I can't remember now, like 18 months maybe. And the job there changed a bit and sort of, you know, it ran its course. And then I was like, right, I think it's time to go back into theatre. And they were looking for a deputy company manager for Oliver. And that was Cameron's. They were doing that. And that was at Drury Lane.
Which I think is the first time you and I met one another.
Yeah, it would have been, because that was my first time working for Cameron's.
Yeah.
And so I met with them, and then I met Alan Hatton, who was the company manager, and it was a new concept for him to have a deputy. So he initially, and rightly so, he was a bit like, well, why are they, you know, they're bringing in another person. And so again, you go, well, is that because of me? What is that because of? But the bottom line was that there was 150 kids.
It was a
doing
vast
the show.
production.
There was 50 children in the show, and every performance.
Yeah.
And so that in itself needed a whole lot of management. So I took on a lot of the sort of children responsibilities and dealing with the chaperones and scheduling of the children and all of those things. And it worked really well. And he was somebody who had been doing it for a long time. And, you know, we used to sit across from each other in the office at Drury Lane, and we would laugh. And it was also a really good support network as well, because sometimes being a company manager can be quite lonely, because obviously you hear a lot of information that is confidential. You can't really go and sit in the pub and be like, well, this person's dealing with this at the moment. What an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, but you can, or when something's frustrating, you sort of, you know, one of the things about being a company manager is that you've got to try and present this calm persona all the time, because people need to know that if they're coming to you, that they're going to get, what version of you are they going to get? And I don't think that's helpful. If you're having a bad day, you need to try and put it on the back burner when you're at work, which is hard. And I think that's a whole another thing for doing the job now. It's a bit different. But then certainly it's kind of like there was an expectation that if you were at work, you were fine and you could do it. And so you would try and be approachable all the time. But then when the door shut, sometimes it was just good to have that vent, be able to have that kind of like, oh my God, what are they doing? Why do they think they can do that? How did that happen? And just to be able to have that moment and just to be able to share things. And I learned a lot from him, and he was brilliant. And then they were looking for a company manager for Les Mis. And they sort of said, obviously Oliver's not going anywhere, but we've got this opportunity. Now, with hindsight, I will say what a great opportunity.
Yeah.
At that point, I think I was about to be 30 or just turned 30. So still young, on the younger side. And I had lunch with two of the people from the office, and they were like, so what do you think about it? And I came out with something like, well, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure it will keep me busy enough. I mean, how they didn't just hit me and go, what are you talking about? And that also came back to bite me, because I obviously took the job because it was an amazing opportunity, and what a thing to be sort of offered at that point in my career. And
was it already at the Sondheim by then?
No, it was at the Queen's.
It was at the Queen's. Okay.
It was still the Queen's then.
But even so, it must have seemed like a much smaller production than Oliver.
It happened to coincide with the 25th anniversary year. During that 2 years.
Busy year.
So there was a lot going on. There was a lot of celebrities coming in and out, and, the O2 concert and all of those things. Yeah. And so it was a really busy 2 years. And also that show never slows down. There's always something happening on it. There's always someone new going into it. There's always an event to do. And I had the best time on it. But then the 2-year mark came up again. And I was like, oh, time to move on. And it coincided with Michael Grandage finishing his time at the Donmar, and his last show was Richard II. And he asked me to go back and do that as company stage manager, which is where you combine the role of company manager and stage manager. Mm-hmm. And so I left Cameron's to do that and did that. And I remember thinking at the time, they're never going to ask me back, because I've turned my back on them and I've left, and that's it, and I'll never work for them again. Because there was a little bit of that at that time, not just with Cameron's, but anywhere where you kind of, if you left somewhere, you were never sure you were going to get asked back.
Clans in a way.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Or at least sort of pools of
because
they're pulling from all the time.
And it's like, you're that sort of person, or you're this person, or you're that person. So I went and did Richard II at the Donmar. And then after that, I think I just decided that I needed a bit of a break, because I'd been working. My dad had passed away very suddenly whilst I was working on Les Mis, and I hadn't really had time to think about any of that. So I just stopped for a little bit and did bits and pieces of work, which was great, and I covered company manager on Ghost for a bit, because by this point I'd built up enough contacts and experience in different places that people knew they could, you could come and do that for a few weeks, which was great. I got to do the Olympics.
Yeah, we were going to ask you about that.
That's exciting.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was just one of those being in the right place at the right time. And someone said, can you come in and can you give us 15 days between this point and this point to help with, at that point, it was to help with the whole bike section that was happening at the end of the opening ceremony. So I was like, yeah. So that included things, and it was completely, although it was called, we were called pro casting. We weren't casting, but it was sort of company management, really. And there were so many different teams of people. So you meet people now and they go, oh yeah, I did the Olympics. Oh yeah, I did the Olympics. But everyone did different, there were so many sections. People involved in it, and so many sections. So the section I was involved with included things like, so my knowledge about BMXing and half pipes and quarter pipes and these sorts of things now, which are basically the ramps that they can go up. I didn't know anything about that. But going down to Hastings and watching these people with Danny Boyle and sort of almost auditioning people. And BMXers, there's like grown men out there that have turned it into their
Yeah.
profession,
Yeah.
and they take it very seriously. And we had all these different sorts of bikers. And so, you know, it meant basically for a series of Saturdays being at Dagenham East for like something stupid like 6:30 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning, and waiting for all these different bikers to turn up. Some of these BMXs, they hadn't been, you know, it was like, if you could get them to turn up on time, it was like a big win.
That was the achievement.
Yeah. But unfortunately, where we were rehearsing was next to a wind farm. So it was quite hard. You know, we couldn't always, because obviously when they're doing all of their flips and their turns and things, it's quite tricky to be able to rehearse those when it's so windy. And then long story short, we got into the stadium. So being part of that and being in the Olympic Stadium, watching them rehearse, you know, that was pretty special. And then unfortunately, because of timings, they had to cut a section. And unfortunately, a big chunk of the bike section got cut. I didn't take it so badly, but some of those bikers...
Yeah.
I mean, it was a bad day when I started off when we were in this sort of, you know, temporary office in the Olympic grounds. And I remember starting the day at the desk, you know, I had to phone like 130 people and tell them they weren't doing it anymore. And I started sort of sat up at my desk. And by the end of the day, I was sort of under the desk on the floor because my phone kept running out of battery. And I had to be near, so literally under the desk. And some of these people were really, naturally, you know, you've just told you've been rehearsing for this for weeks and weeks and weeks. And now suddenly you're not doing it anymore. And you can't, you know, and some people were gracious about it and understood. Some people were angry. Some people were really upset. On the night, because it would just end up with a small section of them, I got a couple of messages from some of the bikers being like, "Well, it looked rubbish anyway," and you're like, "Okay, that's really nice of you."
How do you deal with that on a personal level?
Yeah,
like, do you compartmentalize?
It's really hard, isn't it? And I think it's something through company management as well. So it's all the same. Like everything I've talked about is a lot of it is dealing with people. And it's dealing with every sort of person, from children through to celebrities, through, you know, for graduates to people that have been doing it forever. I think it's all, you have to remember that it's not about you. And that's a really big thing, because it's not about, they're not having to go at you. I mean, they are, but it's not about you. You didn't make that decision. And you've been employed to manage that. And unfortunately, sometimes you are the bearer of bad news. So all you can do is try and deliver it in a way that is sensitive. You know, you don't want to be blasé and be like, well, hey, guess what? You thought you were going to be riding around the Olympic Stadium on July, whatever it was. No, I can't remember. I was going to say 26th, but I don't know if that's right. Guess what? You're not doing it anymore. You've got to put yourself in their situation for a minute and go, how are they going to receive this news? Probably not well. So you want to try and get your tone right. And I think the more you can do that, and you have to just listen, and they just want to be able to vent. They don't want you to say, well, actually they needed a really clear cut and blah, 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 and blah, you know, all of that. So I think it's that. And then really trying hard not to take it personally. But, you know, after the 20th person shouted at you, you're a bit like, oh God. Yeah. But you have to keep going because you've got to do it. That's the job. I think that's one of my things in life, is that sometimes even when it's really tough, you've just got to keep going. Because if I say I'll do something for somebody, I'll do it.
Does it ever affect you?
Sometimes when you have to deliver bad news, I think sometimes you can't help but take that on, because it's also affecting you, but you're having to sort of put your feelings to one side almost, because you are having to tell people something. You know, I've been involved with a couple of shows where people have passed away during it, and having to deliver that news to people is quite tough. But again, it's also, in a way, you almost feel grateful that you are the person telling people, because you feel like you can handle it in a way, because you are probably the person who has been involved with that team of people most closely. You understand that person's relationship to those people, and again, thinking about how you deliver it. And so maybe sometimes, you know, I overthink. And so maybe some people would be more of a blanket, like, this is how we're dealing with it. And no two people will deal with something in the same way.
Sure.
But definitely things do affect you. Or when you've got to tell someone, you know, someone will come to you and say, I really need this day off because it's my best friend's wedding. And whichever way you look at it, you cannot make it work. And you know that you've tried everything you can do. But you also know ultimately your job is to make sure that show is covered. And you can't do it. And then you know how much that's going to affect somebody. So again, you just have to think about how you're going to deliver that information. Have you done everything you can do? Have you been fair? And I think that's a big thing. And that's always been my sort of work ethic, you know, sort of to be firm but fair. Be firm in the sense of, I think you want to be approachable. You want people to have a nice time at work, but I think there's also got to be boundaries. And then fair in the sense of, I think sometimes people are a bit like, no, what's the question? If that makes sense. Whereas I would always hope that people would come and ask a question. And if you agree to something for that person, you've then got to be open to at least considering it for anybody else that comes and asks it. Because what you don't want everyone to be accused of is having favourites or showing favouritism. And I think that's something I've worked really hard on over. You might have, you know, you might see some people outside of work a bit more than others, but I think it's in work, you're there to do a job. And I always think if you set yourself that sort of task of being fair, even if someone comes back and is like, well, I don't think that is fair, you know you've come at it from the right place, as opposed to going, well, yeah, you're right, because actually I like that person more and they came in after you and I've let them have it over you, you know, and being able to explain that. And so, you know, communication, I suppose, is like, and tone is really important.
That's a hard job, I think.
It's tricky. It's really hard to get right. If you get it right, it's great. And when you get it right, and you do get it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's something also that I think certainly since the pandemic, actually being able to stand up and go, we made a mistake, we got that wrong, is really, it's not always the most comfortable thing to have to do. But I think doing that takes the heat out of anything. And people go, oh, they're saying sorry. Oh, okay, I was going to have a go about it, but actually they've just said sorry. And, you know, that's all you can do. You're going, we got it wrong. So any arguments you were going to have with us or shout at us about something or be annoyed, you can still be all of those things, but we've said we're sorry. And we're going to try not to do that again. Doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. But I think sometimes like sharing your process with people is quite useful.
Yeah, I think it helps them understand.
Yeah. You're not purposely trying to ruin their lives. You know, it might feel like that sometimes, but
I'm trying to help you.
Trying to help. I think that's
my lovely mum says nobody gets out of bed in the morning wanting to be the bad guy.
No, it's true. You're not intentionally wanting to go to work and shout at somebody.
No.
And I always think that's something I really try not to do. And very occasionally, you know, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I have actually shouted, because I don't think you need to. I think sometimes some people have this idea of company management that it's a bit like being a head teacher, sort of no running in the corridor sort of thing. And it's my way or no way. And I think that works for some people, but I think that's certainly not my style of company management.
You mentioned then things developing from the pandemic in terms of how we're relating within companies. I know you, well, as we've said since Oliver, as somebody who visits productions from the outside, I've always found you to be an enormous ally in terms of looking after people. You know, you and I quite often team up to look after a person, and we were doing that before we actually voiced it.
Yeah, before we realised what it was.
But then you were also a huge champion of the beginnings of the Show Minds work. That all happened within companies you were working on. So will you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since the pandemic? Because I think it's
so I think
epic.
You know, whilst predominantly I have, you know, for the last 10 years or so, I have worked a lot for Camerons, but generally I do a show for them and then go to do something for somebody else. And that's just the way it worked. And I always think that's good. I think it's good to mix up who you work with. And then just before the pandemic, I was company manager on Hamilton, and I've been really successful, I suppose, in getting to open shows.
I was going to ask you about that. I know we're going immediately off topic, but
I suppose it's all relevant because it builds up the experience. But I was really
kind of with a key. If you've got a big show to open, we're giving it to Katy for a while there. Yes.
Well, yeah. No, I just got into that position where I was on a run of opening new shows. So I was lucky enough to do, Miss Saigon when that came back to the Prince Edward. And then I stayed in the same theatre and did Aladdin, and then Hamilton. And then going from, so I'd had a break after doing Saigon and worked for Disney again. And then I did Hamilton and then straight into, just before the pandemic, doing Mary Poppins. You'll see that the Prince Edward features just around the corner. The Prince Edward features high in my career. I think I spent like half my life there. But I started to look at things and think, actually, I really enjoyed opening shows and the challenge of that. And I think there's two groups of people. I think there's the group of people who enjoy setting up new productions, and there are people that enjoy taking over on shows. Neither one is better than the other. It's just different. I think it's slightly different skill sets. And that started me, because I think if you set things up properly, they will run, and they will hopefully run more smoothly. That's the dream. That's what you're aiming for. And so that includes things like treating people. I think it's seeing people as people. And I think that's what I've always done. And I like people, and I like all different sorts of people. And I also see the relevance and the importance of it being a team. And that team starts when you walk through stage door and you meet the person on stage door. It's the cleaners, it's the crew, it's the in-house teams, it's the box office, it's the theatre management, it's the cast, it's the production team, it's the technical teams, it's the office. And that collectively, it's that bunch of people that are going to put that show on. And within that, you've got so many different sorts of people, and everyone needs something slightly different. And I really believe in setting people up to succeed. And I think that's where we were trying to sort of, rather than go, well, this person's just not doing it anymore, so we should get rid of them. It's like, actually, there's something going on. What can we do to help them? And also working for a company like Cameron's, there was a lot of resources there that you could use. And, they were always very good at sort of helping with those things. I was also, at the same time, and this is pre-pandemic, really sort of, and we were talking about it a lot as well, was the mental health side of the industry. And, sometimes when people would phone in sick and, you wanted people, there was a stigma, I think, pre-pandemic, and there still is to a slightly lesser extent, I think, but there was definitely something before the pandemic of sort of mental health was sort of not really talked about, not really discussed. And people were really worried that if they came to you and said, actually, I'm really struggling, people were worried that they weren't going to work again. And so it got me thinking. And then during the pandemic, I used some of the time to sort of think about actually what I could do and where I wanted my career to go, because I could keep company managing or could try and do it on a slightly different scale, but using a lot of those skills still. So, Claire and I were talking a lot.
We sat on a park bench in St James's
exactly.
Park, didn't we?
Yeah, because
plotting.
Yeah. Also met with Raf from Applause for Thought, who was she had been setting that up, and so there was lots of things bubbling away, and then I spoke. We were coming out of the pandemic, and in theory, I was going back to Mary Poppins to reopen that, and this opportunity came up to go into the office and help get all of the shows back up and running. Which obviously, why wouldn't you do that? That was it was a great opportunity. So I went in as production supervisor, which also gave me the opportunity to build. I was really aware that coming out of the pandemic, it wasn't going to be enough for everyone just to come back on day one and be like, okay, we haven't been here for 18 months, but here we go. Here's your scripts. Here's your scores.
Go.
Off you all go.
Yeah.
So we built in these induction days, or I think in that year we called them return to work days. And that was in conjunction with Claire and Applause for Thought. And it was just about just taking that day or that afternoon to acknowledge that we had been through something quite huge. And everybody's experience of it had been different. Some people had a great time. Some people had a terrible time. Some people had lost people. Some people were so anxious about coming back to work, or the fear of losing work again, or getting sick and not being able to see other vulnerable people that they had in their families. So it was a whole load of things. So by just taking this time to talk about it and to give them some tools to be able to deal with it, I think was a really good thing. Now, whether we got it completely right on that day, probably not, but it was a start. And I think people were encouraged that actually maybe things were going to be slightly different. in this post-pandemic world. And that sort of started the journey as to where, so I was production supervisor for a year, just over a year, which then sort of naturally led into this other role called head of people and culture, which was about, it was sort of encompassing, because I think, again, in the post-pandemic world, the importance of mental health and the relevance of mental health has been improved so much. And the same, HR, which in theatre never really existed, is something that's now coming into play more and more. And I think, but it's about getting it right. You can't just, it's not like a one size fits all. You can't just say, we're going to do this, this and this now. And it's about taking people on the journey with you and making it fit for theatre, because, if you tell everybody they can't speak, you can't do this and you can't do that, and you're going to lose people straight away. But by trying to encourage people just to think about what they're doing, think about, if you make that joke, how is that going to be received? And that's not saying you can't have a joke anymore, but it's just encouraging people to think a little bit. So there was lots of things around that. I think there was a big push on the mental health side in terms of when people were struggling, trying to offer some support. And that went for the office as well. It wasn't just for the shows, but also acknowledging that the people that work on the production side in the offices, they needed support too. And I think it's just continued from that, really. And I think it's just changing, seeing people as people. I think it's encouraging people to be a bit kinder. And yes, there's a show that has to happen, but there's a way of making that show happen, which doesn't mean killing everybody. That also doesn't mean just saying, oh yeah, that's fine, you don't have to come in today, you don't have to come in today. Oh, that's, it doesn't mean that you're lowering the standards or anything. But actually, I think if people feel like they're being seen as a person, as opposed to, oh, I'm just the third person in this team, I'm the fourth person in that team, oh, I'm the third person from the left in this scene, I think you get more from people. So to go full circle, so at the middle of last summer, I was company manager for Old Friends in conjunction with my other role. So that started rehearsing in August. And it was a real opportunity because I'd done the gala the year before on the sort of office side. It was a really special project for Cameron, and it was those shows don't come along very often, and I understood the reason why I was being asked to do it. But I also took it as an opportunity to put into practice everything we talked about since the pandemic, and sort of saw it as a sort of a project as well as an actual role having to be fulfilled. And to make sure that people felt on day one at the meet and greet, you've got everybody is invited. Whether they can attend is a different thing, but everybody is invited, everybody is included. On the first day of rehearsals, you've always got your creative team, and there'll be various speeches, and there might be a model presentation, which is like a set, showing people what the set is going to look like. And I think just having people at the beginning of that journey is really important. We did things like take pictures of everybody, so that there was a picture board, so that if you didn't, in 3 weeks' time, you'd forgotten somebody's name, you could go and have a look. But again, it's just a visible reminder that everybody is part of that company, and everyone has a part to play in it. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from doing that show, is that everybody felt seen, everybody felt included, everybody felt appreciated and valued. And that wasn't by bribing them or bringing in sweets and obviously that does help from time to time, but I think it's just appreciating people for the role they play. We had a company of 19, the two names above the title were Bernadette Peters and Leia Salonga, and then we had 17 other cast members who were all leading players in their own right. And so it could have gone horribly wrong, and you could have had a nightmare of a time. But it worked out really well because they were a team, they were an ensemble, and everybody respected each other. And yeah, there were little things that went wrong and little arguments and little, things like that. But we dealt with them, because that was another thing that, dealing with things, communication, it goes back to communication again. And rather than brushing something under the carpet, if it's a problem, nip it in the bud and talk about it and move on. And then it's a much sort of easier thing to deal with at the time, rather than 3 months later when actually the tiniest thing becomes the biggest thing, and it takes a lot longer to deal with.
Yeah, the communication is so important. And actually, it's really interesting to see that a lot of what you're building creates better theatre fundamentally, because happy people are going to be happy doing their jobs.
Yeah. I think it's really important, and I think it's not going, this is how I company manage, or this is how I run something. It's going, okay, let's see. You sort of meet everybody where they're at and go, okay, how is it going to work for this? Am I going to be, calling people and sort of saying, oh, you're 2 minutes late for this or something? Or am I going to be like, okay, that person works in this way. That means I know they'll be here by this time, which doesn't affect anybody. You still know where they are, but you're not screaming at them down the phone because they're 2 minutes late for something. And I think it is just about, especially, looking at the group of people you were working with, they all had families, they all had lives. And so there were things going on. And so people needed different levels of support. Some people were fine, you never saw them. Some people, you talk to a lot more. But I think it is just that. I think it's just being able to talk to people and understand a little bit without taking it all on yourself, which again is something you can't fix everybody, but you can sort of give them some pointers as to how they might be able to help themselves a bit or know when to get involved or not get involved. I think those are really important, because also being able to, if you can see what's going on, if you can sort of, intuition is really helpful in this career, because if you get a sense that something's not quite right, by asking a couple of questions, you can actually get to the bottom of something a lot quicker than actually waiting until it sort of fully presents itself, if that makes sense. And that's something we've talked about a lot. And actually, you just get a sense of something that's not right. And that sounds like, it's not very mathematical, but it is a kind of, it served me well, certainly, I think, is to be able to sort of understand how people operate, how people work, and know when something's not right.
Yeah, you identify the cues.
Yeah.
Do you feel like a therapist?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It does feel very much like a therapy kind of role in some respects.
Yeah. And I think some people either embrace that side of it or go, that's not me. And that's fine. Yeah. I think as long as people know where they stand with you, I am always happy to talk to somebody. And I think you do, because you have people that, young graduates who are just struggling with like adapting to life outside of college. You've got people that have got problems with their partners or children or families or just having a rough time. And I think all the things you experience in life can only help make you better at that job. I mentioned earlier, my dad passed away suddenly, a long time ago now. But again, whilst you don't want anyone to be in that situation, it is part of life, but it helps. You can then, I don't want to say you use your own father's death for something, but you can then use that to help other people.
Yeah, you draw
because
from
you've
that
been through it. Because
experience.
and again, it gives you, unless you've been through it, you can't understand what that's like. But then it does help you in other areas, in terms of mental health as well. I've struggled at points in my life, and I'm very open about talking about that because it might help somebody else. I had a conversation with some friends last night where all three of us were like, oh yeah, well, I've seen a therapist. Oh yeah, I've seen a therapist. Oh yeah, I've seen a therapist. And it was a really open conversation. Whereas before, perhaps people wouldn't have said that because there's that stigma. But there's all these things now that can help. But I think that's something that's certainly grown since the pandemic, is actually there's more support for people, whether it is in HR, whether it is in training, whether it is in mental health. It's all of those things.
And with that style of approaching the teams you're working with, do you find that is then reflected back? You mentioned earlier that the company manager kind of needs to stay calm and cool whatever's happening. Do you feel like people gave you the space to have a bad day?
I think particularly on this most recent one, because it's not like you do, as a company manager, you do the rounds. So you go and visit, during the half, which is the 35 minutes before the show. You do the rounds and you go around each dressing room and technical departments, or go around the building and just check in with people, and you're saying hello. And that's not really the point for like a big in-depth conversation about something, but it is just a touch point to be able to go, how are you today? Is everything all right? And when people ask you if you're okay, in that moment, my thing would always be, yeah, I'm fine. I'm good, thanks. Because that's not for me then to sit there and go, do you know what? I've had a really bad day today.
Yeah.
People aren't asking for that. But there would be times people go, oh, are you okay today? Or actually, I just saw how someone spoke to you. Are you okay? And you don't get that in every company, but certainly this last one was, people were. But I think also people do appreciate more that you are a human being as well. And I think I think that is getting better.
It's a very hopeful note to wrap up on.
It is indeed.
I hope it is getting better too. And thank you for doing the work that you're doing. I think it's invaluable.
Oh, but it's a whole team, isn't it? It's not just like one person. It's a whole bunch of people.
It does take somebody saying, we have to change this to allow that team to also go,
I think
I've been thinking that too.
I think it's really important. And I think also understanding that, we're at a point where, people are being employed. Before the pandemic, there were more people available and you had more people that have been doing roles for a longer time. So HODs, head of departments and people like that had been doing those jobs for a lot longer. And so to be able to for people to have the opportunity to move up, there wasn't really that so much. And then after the pandemic, people were getting promoted sooner than perhaps they would have done normally. Mm-hmm. And so it ties into that as well, and sort of trying to give people the support they need in order to succeed, whether that's giving them some line management training or taking that time to just explain things to them a bit more rather than just, why don't you know how to do this?
Why isn't it good enough? Yeah.
Never, well, whose fault was that? It's like, how did that happen? Why did that happen? How can we avoid it happening again? Rather than being like, who did that? That's not helpful to anybody. So I think it's trying to create a slightly kinder world. And I think sometimes sort of shying away from that word because you think it's, that's a bit light. It's a bit, people are going to take advantage of that. But I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there's any, you've still got the same rules in place.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of getting there.
Yeah. Completely agree.
I think that's
completely agree. So, Katie, what do you do at the 5-minute call? I mean, how many things are you doing at the 5-minute call?
At the 5-minute call, so you're usually finishing up your rounds as a company manager. If you're in the office, then you're thinking, I hope everyone's, you're probably looking at your phone going, no one's phoned, everything must be all right tonight.
Great.
They're okay. So you might be making your way front of house. I'd probably be running back to the office to get my radio to go front of house with because I'd forgotten it. Or someone's just phoning on, oh my God, I forgot I had friends in tonight. I didn't get their ticket, can help. There's usually something like that, or someone needing something, or you might have just gone back to the office to make a note about something that you need to remember to do later.
Does that all now feel very run of the mill to you, or do you get a kind of curtain up fizz as well?
No, I think it's still special. I think there's still something because there's a sense of like atmosphere and hearing the audience. If there's an orchestra, hearing the orchestra tune up, it is just that sort of and you're sort of also keeping one eye on the clock because because you can hear, have we got everybody? Is everyone coming down? Oh no, so and so's forgotten this, so and so hasn't got that. Oh no, we're still waiting for these people. So you're also thinking about, okay, well that's like the third day in a row we're waiting for that person, so that maybe needs a little conversation. But it's just that buzz, and then you sort of see it happen, once we've got everybody in and it's an achievement every night to get all those people into the theatre. You're working with front of house, you see, and then the show starts, and then you're like, and then you can breathe. So generally at the 5, actually, I would have been probably changing my shoes. I always tried not to go front of house in my trainers because I think you're representing the company, so you need to be a bit smart. Yeah. And occasionally I'd forget, but that's probably what I'd be doing, is trying to find the other shoe or something.
Go with odd shoes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We have a tradition on this podcast.
Okay.
Where we ask the previous guest to write a question for the next guest, and it goes sight unseen by everybody until this very moment.
Okay. Do they know who the guest is?
No.
Okay.
No.
Fine. Oh gosh.
So it could be anything.
Okay.
Who are your heroes and why?
Oh, that's lovely.
Very nice.
Who are my heroes and why? I think anybody who is managing to juggle life and make it into work, sort of thinking in the show context. Anybody who is able to juggle everything and get into work and do all of that and make it to the end of the week and not be a complete wreck, or be a wreck but sort of being kind to themselves about being a wreck and being okay about it. I think I'm always impressed by those people because I think that's pretty special. Anyone that's like juggling multiple things. I think to look at someone like Bernadette Peters, who at her age was still front and centre at warm-up, still doing 8 shows a week, Even with an injury, we're still finding ways through doing it. We worked with especially on that show, Julie Mackenzie, someone that's in their 80s, and they're still as passionate about the industry as they were, 30 years ago, and also understanding that the world has changed. I think it's people like that, but I think it's rather than a specific person. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Lovely, yeah.
That's lovely.
That's such a nice answer.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
It's great. Anyone that's passing things on to other people and setting a tone, setting a standard, having the bar so high, it gives everyone else something to sort of stay at. It's important.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Wow. Thank you so very much. That was...
Can you use any of that?
Yes, of course we can. That's brilliant. Thank you for spending our time with us.
That's all right.
Sharing your story.
Pleasure.
We've loved it.
We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the 5-Minute Call. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and ring the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you more amazing stories.
If you are or have been affected by any of the topics discussed in today's episode, please see the show notes below for some helpful resources.